Welcome back to Ben's Book Club. Today, we are diving into the book Rethinking Humanity: Five Foundational Sector Disruptions, the Life Cycle of Civilizations, and the Coming Age of Freedom. This isn't just your standard tech forecast, the kind predicting a slightly faster microchip or a slightly better battery. No. Authors James Arbib and Tony Seba are making a massive claim here. They argue we're actually living through the fastest, deepest, and absolutely most consequential transformation in human history. To put it simply, we're on the verge of the coming age of freedom. It's an era where the fundamental cost of survival literally plummets to near zero, freeing humanity from millennia of resource struggles. It's a really bold claim, right? But as you'll see throughout this explainer, the data they present is just incredibly compelling.
Okay, so let's dive into this by imagining a world where basic survival costs almost nothing. Stop for a second and just genuinely picture your bank account. Got it? Now, imagine your monthly electric bill, your grocery bill, and your commuting costs all shrinking down to a tiny fraction of what they are today. Or, crazy as it sounds, disappearing entirely. What would you actually do with all that leftover income? The authors argue we're rapidly shifting from a society built on scarcity and extraction to one of absolute superabundance and creation. What does our daily reality look like when the basic cost of living approaches zero? Well, it fundamentally rewrites what it means to be a human being. To understand this massive civilizational phase change, we're going to look at the author's models by breaking down four key areas. First, the five foundational sectors converging right now. Second, the mechanics of how technological disruption actually works. Third, the historical life cycle of civilizations. And finally, the ultimate choice we face: freedom or collapse. Starting with part one, the five-sector convergence. We're looking at a disruption happening right now, in the 2020s. And this table really hits the nail on the head regarding the author's core argument. It isn't just one single industry changing, guys. It's a simultaneous convergence across the five main pillars that underpin our entire global economy: energy, transport, food, information, and materials. Instead of just a linear list, think of it more like a giant web of disruption. Energy is shifting away from extracting fossil fuels over to capturing abundant solar and wind, all stored in next-gen batteries. Transport? That's moving from internal combustion engines to autonomous electric vehicles. But it gets even wilder. Food is actually transitioning from traditional animal agriculture to something called precision fermentation and cellular agriculture. In simple terms, precision fermentation is basically brewing food the exact same way we brew beer, but we're programming microorganisms to produce specific proteins instead of alcohol. Pretty mind-blowing, right? Meanwhile, information is leaping into AI and sensor networks, and materials are shifting from traditional mining to synthetic biology. That means manufacturing materials at the molecular level. The multiplier effect here is just staggering. Cheap energy powers cheap computing, which accelerates synthetic biology, which in turn drastically lowers transport and material costs. Every single piece is feeding into everything else. Now, what's super interesting about this is the financial impact of just one of those sectors on your everyday life. The authors calculate that autonomous transport fleets, basically robot taxis running on cheap electricity, could save the average American family over $5,600 a year. Just let that sink in for a second. $5,600. That is a massive sudden raise for the middle class. We're talking better education for kids, paying off debt, or just drastically reducing financial anxiety. It's a huge injection of capital directly back into everyday people's pockets. Furthermore, they project a 10 times cost drop for engineered proteins by 2035. Using that precision fermentation we just talked about, we're going to be able to produce food at a fraction of the cost and using a fraction of the land. Let's slow down and imagine a world where high-quality protein is cheaper than a bottle of water is today. We are talking about effectively making basic nutritional needs approach zero cost. When food and transport become this profoundly cheap, the very concept of global poverty and resource scarcity, it just begins to evaporate. We move from fighting over pieces of a really small pie to having more pie than we could ever possibly eat. Which brings us to part two, mechanics of change. How do these massive, deeply entrenched legacy industries actually get unseated? So the absolutely crucial point here is that incumbent powers always fail because they expect gradual, linear change. A legacy auto executive might sit there and think, well, electric vehicles will take 50 years to gradually replace gas cars. But real technological disruption doesn't work like that at all. It knocks politely for a moment, and then boom, it kicks the door down. Think back to the late 2000s. How long did it take for the smartphone to completely obliterate the flip phone market? It wasn't 50 years. It was barely a handful. Disruption sweeps the market on a rapid, non-linear S-curve. Once a new technology hits that tipping point of cost and capability, adoption just explodes. It completely overtakes the market in just 10 to 15 years. The authors outline what they call a rapid death spiral for legacy industries. Think about large traditional power plants or massive factory farms for a second. They rely on enormous scale just to pay off their massive fixed costs. So what happens when a disruptive technology steals even just 10 to 15% of their market share? They instantly lose their profitability. To survive, these legacy industries are forced to raise prices on their remaining customers. But here's the profound irony. Raising prices just drives those remaining customers away even faster toward the cheaper, newer technology. It's an accelerating, inescapable loop. Trying to survive actually kills the legacy industry faster, leading straight into bankruptcy. To see how this works in practice, they point to TaaS, Transportation as a Service. This isn't just about trading a gas engine for a battery in your personal driveway. It's the massive shift from owning a car to using on-demand, autonomous electric fleets. Now, why does this kill the oil industry? Well, because electric vehicles last for hundreds of thousands of miles more than traditional gas cars. When these hyper-durable electric vehicles are deployed in fleets running 24/7, global oil demand doesn't just experience a slight dip, it plummets way past the point of profitability. The authors argue this model is going to quietly collapse the oil industry in a matter of years, simply by removing the bulk of global gasoline demand. Because of these cascading economic effects, the authors' models make some incredibly bold claims. For example, they predict the total financial insolvency of the traditional U.S. cattle industry by 2030. Yeah, you heard that right. As cheaper, cleaner food as software alternatives hit the market, the traditional meat industry is going to fall right into that exact death spiral we just looked at. Imagine what this looks like for a moment. Picture land the size of the Americas, suddenly freed up from livestock farming, millions of acres ready to be returned to nature, rewilded, or repurposed for human flourishing. It's literally a total reshaping of the physical map of the world.
Moving on to part 3, the life cycle of civilizations. To truly grasp the stakes of what's happening today, we absolutely must look backward to see how humanity handled massive technological leaps in the past.
Here, the authors introduce a super vital concept called the organizing system. This is crucial to understand. Let's think of it simply. If technology is the hardware, the organizing system is the software. It's the operating system of society. It's our institutions, our laws, our economic models, and our cultural beliefs. They argue that technology only provides the potential. It's our operating system that decides if we actually succeed. You can have the most powerful next-generation hardware in the world, but if you try to run it on a 10,000-year-old operating system, the entire thing is going to crash. Tracking human history, they map our civilization across a few distinct ages. For most of our history, we were in Humanity 1.0, the age of survival. We were strictly limited by what we could hunt and forage. Then came Humanity 2.0, the age of extraction, covering the last 10,000 years of agriculture, cities, and industry. Now, this age created incredible surplus and built our modern world for sure, but it was driven by the centralized extraction of finite resources. And that brought massive inequality, geographic lock-in, and brutal wars over those resources. Now, with the unprecedented disruptions of the 2020s, we actually have the potential to leave all of that behind and make the leap into Humanity 3.0, the age of freedom. What's absolutely fascinating here is that every great civilization, from Sumer all the way to Rome, eventually hit the limits of their organizing systems. They scaled up as much as their energy and production technologies would possibly allow, but when internal or external shocks hit, like plagues, droughts, or unrest, they collapsed. Why? Because instead of reinventing the rules and adapting, they doubled down on the old playbook. Think of the Roman Empire. Instead of innovating, they started massively diluting their currency to pay for ever-expanding walls and larger armies. They tried to extract more and centralize more power, which led straight to their ultimate ruin.
And this brings us to part 4, freedom or collapse. This is the most critical part of their thesis regarding the 2020s, because we are facing the exact same test those ancient civilizations faced.
Right now, we're kind of stuck between two worlds. On one side, we have the dying age of extraction, which relies heavily on centralized control, heavy resource mining, high waste, and carefully managing scarcity. On the flip side is the emerging age of creation. This new paradigm is localized. It relies on photons, electrons, and DNA to create exactly what we need. It's a profound shift from scarcity to near-zero marginal cost superabundance, where production isn't tied to a specific mine or oil field anymore. It can happen anywhere and everywhere. By shifting to this new system, the authors project that we can actually solve 21st century environmental problems. The new production models require 90% fewer natural resources. They generate 10 to 100 times less waste. Think about that. For decades, we've been told that the only way to save the planet is to sacrifice, to tighten our belts, and to just live with less. But this data shows the exact opposite. For the first time in human history, environmental destruction and resource conflict become solvable not through austerity, but by producing an unprecedented abundance with wildly better efficiency. But the warning here is stark. Just as Rome fell, our modern institutions are visibly straining under the weight of this technological shift. And to be clear, this isn't about specific political parties. It's a systemic flaw. If our 20th century political and economic leaders try to protect the old dying industries, using things like tariffs, subsidies, and centralized control to fight off this transition, we risk following those ancient empires right into ruin. We simply cannot solve 21st century problems using 20th century organizing systems. The operating system absolutely must be upgraded. The authors state this is a totally binary choice for the 2020s. Path A is the age of freedom. We successfully transition to an economy of decentralized production and shared prosperity, where basic needs are simply a given, which fundamentally rewrites the social contract. Path B, however, is a modern dark age. This means a complete failure to adapt our organizing system, resulting in severe economic decay, desperate attempts at totalitarian control, and violent conflict over increasingly obsolete resources. The technology is coming regardless, but what we do with it? Well, that is entirely up to us. The choices we make today, the policies we support, and the institutions we're actually willing to reinvent will determine which path humanity takes. Will we be the first civilization to see the pattern and rewrite the rules, or will we blindly repeat history? Let that provocative thought sit with you. The future is entirely up for grabs. Subscribe so you don't miss an episode.